How voters decide. When deciding for whom they will vote, some voters evaluate candidates on the basis of their positions on issues and then cast their ballots for those who best represent their views. Called prospective voting, this method of candidate evaluation focuses on what the candidates will do in the future. A more common form of candidate evaluation is retrospective voting, in which a voter evaluates an incumbent candidate on the basis of whether the incumbent's past decisions and actions are satisfactory to the voter. If they are satisfactory, the voter will likely support the incumbent. If not, the voter will be disposed to support the incumbent's opponent. The prevalence of an incumbency advantage in election outcomes indicates that many voters have a favorable view of the decisions and actions of incumbent candidates for most offices. The most important factor that plays into how a voter decides on a candidate and perceives specific candidates, however, is the voter's party identification. Other influential determinants include those specific to a given election, such as candidates' attributes and the effectiveness of the candidates' campaigns. The strongest bearing on voter preference is party identification, with about half of all voters basing their candidate's choice on the party they identify with. In the 2012 presidential election, party identification was a potent influence on how voters decided among candidates. Among voters who identified themselves as either Democrats or Republicans, loyalty to their party candidates was high, with 90% of both Democrats and Republicans voting for their party's nominee for president. President Obama's victory came in part because of his support among the nation's independent or unaffiliated voters, those who do not identify themselves as either Democrats or Republicans. One significant determinant in why people vote the way they do, policy priorities are to a certain extent aligned with party identification, or even more generally, with ideology, because the political parties usually embrace differing viewpoints on issues. National issues that top the list of concerns among voters have remained consistent over many years and include several domestic policy matters, such as the health of the economy, education, crime, health care, and Social Security. In the 2014 midterm elections, the health of the economy was the #1 issue. But how do voters decide which party and which candidates to support at the polls, based on the issues? First and foremost, an issue must be salient to voters. That is, it must resonate with them and reflect something that they care deeply about, an issue they are willing to base their vote on. The ability of voters to cast an issue-based vote increases when candidates differ in their positions on an issue. Remember, salient issues are going to be different for everybody. Incumbency, the situation of already holding an office or an official position, as we've seen, is also a key factor influencing how people vote. Because an incumbent is a known commodity with demonstrated experience to service in office, voters are much more likely to vote for the incumbents than for their challengers. Thus, for most offices, incumbents are much more likely to be reelected than their challengers are to be elected. Indeed, in congressional elections, generally more than 88% of incumbent U.S. senators and 95% of incumbent members of the House of Representatives win re-election. But incumbency is also influential in presidential elections, gubernatorial and state legislative elections, and probably even our local city council elections. Incumbents have notable advantages over challengers, namely greater name recognition, a track record that voters can evaluate, and access to campaign contributions that help get their message out. Make sure you write down those 3 parts of incumbent advantage, and I will repeat them. Namely, great name recognition, a track record that voters can evaluate, and access to campaign contributions that help get their message out. As we have seen, parties and candidates conduct campaigns to influence voters' choices at the polls. Campaigns today vary a great deal in how they are waged. Whereas a candidate for a small town's board of selectmen might knock on the front door of every voter in the community, a U.S. Senate or gubernatorial candidate might spend most of his or her time raising money to pay for expensive television and radio advertisements. Generally, the lower the level of office, the greater the likelihood that the candidate will rely on grassroots activism. Trends in modern campaigns, including a far deeper reliance on paid professional staffers and the prevalence of the media as a tool for communicating with voters, are catapulting the costs of campaigns sky high. Voters' choices are also affected by increasingly negative campaigns, one outcome of the modern political campaign's reliance on paid professionals. Outside consultants typically have far fewer qualms about going negative than do activists in the all-community volunteer-run campaigns that were more typical of earlier times. Consultants use negative campaign tactics for a simple reason. Research shows that the approach sways voter opinion. Although the candidates themselves often prefer to accentuate a positive message that highlights their background, experience, and qualifications, paid campaign consultants generally do not hesitate to sling the mud. Once a candidate establishes name recognition and credibility with voters, many consultants believe highlighting the opponent's negative qualities and actions is an effective campaign strategy. But the effect of negative campaigning is not limited merely to swaying voters from one candidate to another. Research by political scientists shows that negative campaign can suppress voter turnout in several ways. For example, some political scientists note that negative advertising may suppress voter turnout among the attacked candidate's supporters. Other political scientists' research shows that negative campaigning undermines the democratic process by decreasing civic engagement among all voters. According to these findings, the electorate becomes disenchanted with the candidates, about whom voters get a barrage of negative information, with the campaigns because campaigns serve as the primary messengers for delivering negative information about opponents, or with the entire electoral process that facilitates this negativity. Some voters view negative campaigning as being completely at odds with their idealized conception of the democratic process, and this belief may discourage them from voting. Okay, so our poll everywhere question. A retrospective voter is most likely to, and then remember you're going to text your answer to 37607, or you're going to tweet your answer to @poll37607 and then put in the answer, or you can go to that website and you can vote that way.